The sun bled orange over the Arizona plains, and the San Pedro River glimmered like molten fire. Jacob Colt, a lone cowboy and former cavalry scout, reined in his horse at the water's edge. He had spent 3 days tracking stray cattle through the desert, his throat parched and his boots caked with dust. As he leaned to fill his canteen, a faint cry split the quiet air. At first, he thought it was a hawk's call echoing through the canyon, but then it came again, sharp, desperate, human. Jacob's head snapped toward the river bend. Downstream, among the swirling currents, something dark thrashed in the water. His instincts took over before reason could catch up. He kicked his horse hard. "Here!" The stallion pounded down the riverbank, hooves throwing up water and sand. The figure in the current was a woman, her hair long and black as raven feathers, her arms fighting to stay above the surface. She gasped once, twice, then vanished beneath the churning foam. "Hold on!" Jacob yelled, diving in without another thought. The water was cold enough to slice through bone, but he cut through it like a knife. His fingers brushed fabric, soft buckskin, and he pulled hard, dragging the woman upward. She coughed and sputtered as he hauled her to shore, collapsing beside her, both gasping for air. When she finally opened her eyes, they were the color of deep amber, fierce yet frightened. She spoke something in Apache, words he didn't understand, but the tone was clear. Confusion, defiance, pride. "You're safe now," Jacob said softly, brushing wet strands of hair from her face. "You're all right." The woman shivered and pulled away, glaring at him as though he'd committed a sin. "No touch," she hissed in broken English. "No man touch unmarried woman." Jacob raised his hands in apology. "I didn't mean, look, you were drowning. But it was too late." She had already scrambled to her feet, clutching the edge of her torn buckskin dress, looking toward the forested ridge beyond. He followed her gaze and saw them. 5 riders on horseback, emerging from the trees. Apache warriors, their faces painted with red clay, bows drawn and aimed at him. Jacob froze. The tallest of them, a broad-shouldered man with eagle feathers in his hair, shouted something sharp and guttural. 2 warriors dismounted and rushed forward, seizing Jacob by the arms. He didn't fight back. He knew better than to resist. The woman spoke quickly to them in Apache, her tone both pleading and commanding. The leader's expression shifted, anger mixed with something else. Respect, perhaps obligation. Jacob caught only one word from their exchange: law. Moments later, the leader turned to Jacob. "You touch her. You pull her from river. Now she yours. Sacred bond. Sacred wife." Jacob blinked, dripping wet, half in disbelief. "Hold on, what?" The woman's eyes widened too, and she shook her head, arguing in her language. The men ignored her protests. "I didn't ask for a wife," Jacob said, his voice rising. "I was just trying to save her." But the Apache chief's expression hardened. "River choose. Spirit choose. You save, you take. You belong together now." The tribe surrounded them, chanting low and rhythmic as they guided both toward their camp. Jacob's heart pounded. Every instinct screamed to mount his horse and ride, but he could see in their eyes, if he resisted, he wouldn't make it 10 paces. The woman walked beside him, head high despite her trembling. Her name, he soon learned from the murmurs around them, was Noya, which meant moonlight. They reached the village before nightfall. Fires flickered between rows of hide tents, children ran barefoot through the dust, and the air smelled of sage and smoke. The Apache women watched curiously as Noya was led into one tent, Jacob into another. Inside, Jacob sat on a mat, hands bound, mind racing. A few minutes later, the old medicine man entered, a wrinkled figure draped in animal skins, with white paint streaked across his brow. He studied Jacob with sharp, knowing eyes. "You break no law," the old man said slowly. "But River Spirit did. It joined you with our daughter. Sacred bond cannot break." "I didn't mean for this," Jacob muttered. "I didn't come here for a wife." The medicine man's gaze didn't soften. "Mean or not, fate chose. You will respect our way, or die dishonored among strangers." Outside, drums began to beat. a steady, solemn rhythm. Jacob heard the chant rising through the camp. The same word repeated again and again, Noia, Noia, Noia. Moments later, she appeared at the entrance, dressed now in a ceremonial robe of white deer hide, her wet hair braided with feathers and turquoise beads. She looked ethereal under the torchlight, her expression unreadable. The chief spoke to her briefly, then turned to Jacob. "She belongs to you now, by river and spirit, by law of our ancestors." Noia stepped forward, meeting Jacob's eyes. "I do not want belong," she whispered, voice trembling. "But law say so. You saved my life. Now I must give it to you." Jacob swallowed hard. "Then I'll make sure it's a good one," he said quietly. She looked at him for a long moment, searching his face for deceit, but found only sincerity. The ceremony was brief but haunting. They stood by the fire as the tribe circled them, chanting blessings to the river. The medicine man smeared white ash across their foreheads, binding their hands together with a strip of leather. When it was done, the tribe cheered softly, the fire crackled high, and Jacob realized the truth. He had become husband to a woman he barely knew, in a world far from his own. That night, as the camp quieted under the desert stars, Noia sat by the fire outside their tent. She didn't speak for a long time, only stared at the flames. Finally, she said, "You not like other men." Jacob glanced at her. "How's that?" "You not take what law give," she said. "You wait. You respect, maybe. River right about you." Jacob smiled faintly. "Maybe the river's got a strange sense of humor." A silence fell between them, comfortable, uncertain, and full of possibilities. The wind carried the scent of sage through the night, and somewhere beyond the firelight, the San Pedro River whispered softly, as if approving the union it had created. But deep in the shadows of the hills, another set of eyes watched them, a rival warrior who had once claimed Noia as his own. The morning came soft and gold over the Apache camp. Smoke from the cook fires drifted lazily into the dawn, and the river whispered nearby. Jacob woke to the quiet sound of Noia humming beside the tent, her voice low and haunting, like a prayer to the wind. He still wasn't used to being in this world, the rhythm of their language, the unspoken laws that seemed older than time. Every movement, every glance carried meaning. And though he'd been made her husband by a twist of fate, he hadn't touched her beyond the ceremony. When she caught him watching, she smiled faintly. "You sleep heavy," she teased in her accented English. "Cowboy not hear coyotes sing all night?" Jacob chuckled, rubbing the back of his neck. "Guess I'm not used to sleeping where the stars don't quit watching me." Her laughter was brief but warm, the kind that made his chest tighten unexpectedly. But the moment broke when one of the warriors stormed into the camp, face tense. He spoke sharply to Noia, and her expression turned to ice. "What is it?" Jacob asked, rising. She hesitated, then said, "Tahoe," he returned. Jacob frowned. "Who's Tahoe?" Her eyes darkened. "Warrior, son of chief's brother. He won't marry me before. Now he say river wrong. Say you steal what was promised." Jacob's jaw clenched. "Let me guess, he's not the forgiving kind." Before she could answer, shouting erupted from the far end of the camp. Warriors gathered in a wide circle. In the center stood Tahoe, tall, broad, and fierce-eyed, with a necklace of wolf teeth and a hatred that burned like fire. When he saw Jacob, his lips twisted into a sneer. "White man weak, river fool. Apache woman not belong to him." Jacob didn't understand every word, but he understood the tone perfectly. The chief stepped forward, his voice grave. "Law say river bond sacred. No man break it." Tahoe spat at the ground. "Then I challenge. Trial of honor. If he win, he keep woman. If I win, she mine." Gasps rippled through the tribe. Even Noia froze, her face pale. "No," she said quickly. "That law old, too dangerous." But the medicine man lifted his staff. "Ancient ways cannot die. The spirits must decide." Jacob exhaled slowly. He didn't want a fight. He hadn't come here to claim or prove anything. But one look at Tahoe's expression told him there would be no peace until this was settled. He met Noia's worried gaze and said softly, "Don't worry, Moonlight. I've wrangled worse than pride before." The circle formed wide around them. The rules were simple. No guns, no blades, only strength, instinct, and the river's judgment. They stripped down to shirts and trousers, bare feet pressed into the dust. The crowd went silent. A hawk screamed overhead. Then Tahoe lunged. He moved fast like a mountain cat. Jacob barely dodged the first blow, feeling it graze his ribs. The next one caught his shoulder, sending pain shooting down his arm. He staggered back, but years of rough ranch work had built him strong. He ducked under a swing and countered, ramming his shoulder into Tahoe's chest. The warrior stumbled but didn't fall. They grappled, two worlds colliding, each refusing to yield. Dust rose around them, the crowd chanting low, their voices like thunder. Tahoe landed a knee into Jacob's gut, forcing the air from his lungs. Jacob hit the ground, rolling just as Tahoe dove again. Instinct took over. Jacob grabbed a handful of sand and flung it into his eyes. The warrior roared, blinded, and Jacob surged up, slamming a fist into his jaw. The crowd gasped. Tahoe fell to one knee, blood trickling from his mouth. He looked up at Jacob, eyes blazing. For a heartbeat, Jacob thought the man would strike again. But instead, Tahoe dropped his head, breathing hard, defeated. The medicine man raised his staff. "Spirits decide. River bond true. The cowboy wins." The crowd erupted, some cheering, others murmuring in disbelief. Jacob staggered back, catching his breath. Noya rushed forward, eyes bright with tears. She reached for him hesitantly, then cupped his cheek with trembling fingers. "You fight not for pride," she whispered, "but for peace." He smiled faintly. There wasn't much peace in that fight. She laughed through her tears. "Still, I think River choose right." That night the camp celebrated. Fires burned high, drums echoed through the desert, and songs rose to the stars. Jacob sat beside Noya near the flames, exhaustion softening his features. "Tomorrow," she said, "you can leave if you wish. Law say bond sacred, but spirit say free choice after trial." He looked at her, surprised. "You mean I could go?" She nodded. "You save me. You fight for me. You owe nothing more." Jacob stared into the fire for a long moment. The thought of leaving should have brought relief, but it didn't. Instead, he felt a strange heaviness in his chest, a quiet ache that spoke of something deeper. Finally, he said, "If I leave, who's going to make sure you don't fall into another river?" Noya smiled, soft and slow, like dawn breaking over red cliffs. "Maybe. River bring you here not by mistake." The drums slowed, the night deepened, and the world seemed to breathe around them. Weeks passed. Jacob stayed with the Apache, helping mend fences, learning their ways, trading English for stories by the fire. Noya showed him how to listen to the land, the wind, the tracks, the quiet between sounds. They grew close, not by law, but by choice. Sometimes she'd tease him when he failed to catch fish the Apache way. Sometimes he'd tell her stories of ranch life under the endless western sky. One evening, while they sat watching the sun bleed into the horizon, Noya reached for his hand. "When River first take me," she said softly, "I think I'd die. But you pull me out. You not just save body, you save spirit." Jacob looked at her, his voice low. "And you saved mine." The wind swept through the grass, carrying the scent of sage and rain. Under the dying sun, they leaned close, the space between them filled with everything they hadn't said but always knew. When their lips finally met, it wasn't just a kiss, it was the river's whisper, the tribe's law, the desert's approval. Two souls from different worlds, bound by fate, not chains. Years later, travelers spoke of a rancher who lived by the San Pedro River, married to an Apache woman with eyes like moonlight. They said the river itself blessed their union, calm whenever they drew water, fierce whenever harm came near, and every night, when the stars burned bright above the desert, a quiet melody rose from their home, the sound of Noya's song, drifting like a promise through the wild west wind.